Welcome back to part 2 video of going over SOH CAH TOA, sine, cosine, and tangent. So it's very important we understand what the words are meaning, right? Opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse. So let's do that. Opposite. So that's the side of the triangle across from the angle or the theta that is being focused upon. All right, adjacent. The side next to, right, the side of the triangle next to the angle theta, or your target angle. But it's not the hypotenuse side. So this sounds a little confusing. I have visuals to clarify this. And so it's not the opposite side of the triangle, and it's not the hypotenuse. Automatically makes it the adjacent. That's a hint. That's a way to find the adjacent leg of a triangle. Okay, so the last leg of the triangle is a hypotenuse. That's the longest side of a right triangle, and it's always, always, always opposite the 90-degree angle or right angle. It's that little square in the triangle represents 90 degrees, right? So the longest side of any triangle that is a right triangle or has a 90-degree angle, opposite of that angle is the hypotenuse. By the way, that's the first leg you should try to find when you're looking for hypotenuse. All right, let's take a look at a couple of visuals going over some of these definitions. Okay, so here you see a great example of a right triangle. You know that because of the 90 degrees or the little box that you'll see down here indicating this is 90 degrees. And so the very first leg of this triangle I want to find is called the hypotenuse. It's always, always, always opposite that 90-degree angle or right angle. And it's the longest side of the triangle. So the hypotenuse, when I'm looking for part of my ratios that has an H in it, SOH CAH TOA, that's easiest to find first. Again, it's opposite the 90-degree angle. It's always the longest angle. So take a look over here on the right side. There's my theta. That represents the angle. Sometimes you'll see theta. Sometimes you'll see like 35 degrees, 30 degrees. Sometimes you'll see the degree values here. So the leg of the triangle opposite that angle or theta is your opposite side, right? It's your opposite side. Typically, there'll be values all the way around this triangle, and I'll show you that later in some of the example practice problems. And so automatically, if it's not the side opposite of that angle, and it's not the hypotenuse, then that last leg of that triangle you see here in red will always be your adjacent side of the right triangle. Okay, so I'd like to show you another visual, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the theta, or the representing the angle, and I'm going to move it to the other side of the triangle and see how this visual will change. All right, so as you can see here, I have moved the theta from the previous diagram over to the other angle, right? So my angle of focus, or the theta, is now up here in this top portion of the right triangle. Again, right triangle, 90 degrees. The easiest length to find is that H, the hypotenuse. It's always opposite that 90-degree angle. Now, what leg of this triangle is opposite, directly opposite from that theta or the angle shown? I'm showing you that here in blue. This is the opposite length of the side of a triangle. So if it's not the hypotenuse and it's not the side length opposite of our theta or our degree angle, then it must by default be your adjacent side. Sometimes that's the trickiest side to find, but if you can find the hypotenuse and you know the side of the triangle opposite of that theta, then by default, the remaining leg of your right triangle has got to be the adjacent side. All right, so real briefly, I'd like to go over some more definitions and key review that you need to know. I've already spoken about it, but I want to get it down so you can visually see it. That way you can pause, write it down if you need to. I know I've said this before. I'm going to say it again. Always, always, when you're dealing with SOH CAH TOA, you're dealing with 90-degree right triangles and right angles, right? And so opposite the 90-degree angle is always, 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 always the hypotenuse length of the leg of a right triangle. Again, the hypotenuse is always, always, always the longest side length of your right triangle. So the longest side of a triangle, a right triangle, or any triangle, opposite that side is always the largest degree value of that triangle. Try to keep that in mind. All right, this is the end of part 2. We got a little shaking happening here today. Sorry about that. Stick around for part 3. Gonna go over a few more definitions and then a bunch of examples. Math's easy. Take step by step. Thank you for joining me. Like, follow, share, subscribe. Thank you for your time.